It was the worst terror attack in London in over a decade. A terrorist plowing through crowds and going on a deadly stabbing spree.
So how did British law enforcement respond to this?
Here to discuss is former U.S. Army intelligence officer and former advisor to U.S. and NATO commanders in Afghanistan, Andrew Peek. Andrew, good to have you here this morning.
Great to be here.
Unfortunately, under these circumstances, first, just your response to how the police officers in the UK reacted so quickly yesterday, and how difficult it is to go from guarding Parliament to jumping into physical action like they did.
Yeah. It's incredibly difficult. You know, I thought the British police reacted extremely well. It is so hard to go from a civilian environment where they see hundreds of people, there's no threat at all, onto a combat footing instantly. And for those two plainclothes policemen who managed to shoot the attacker in a blink of an eye, I really thought was spectacular bravery by them.
Yeah, they really reduced the potential of damage and harm done. I thought that was very impressive as well, how they jumped into action so fast. You know, when you look at this and you compare it, they said it's the first one in over a decade. The last one was, I think, 7/7/2005, where it was a very well-coordinated attack, and it did a lot of damage. I think it was 3 trains and a bus. You compare that to this, it's almost as if they've been reduced to just a more simple attack using a car. I know you want to talk about how they're using vehicles now to do the damage, but does that also speak to just how good law enforcement is doing at keeping an eye on these people and making sure they don't get their hands on more deadly weapons?
I think it does. I think the rise in lone wolf attacks in the U.S. and the U.K. and elsewhere do speak to that somewhat. I think it also speaks to the fact that groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda are calling for these attacks more than they're trying to set up big coordinated attacks that can be intercepted more easily by intelligence agencies. So there's a little bit of both more supply of these kind of lone wolf vehicle-borne attackers, but also we're doing a good job of tamping down what you might call the demand.
Yeah, well, this is, as we mentioned, the 4th type of attack like this where you have a vehicle plowing through innocent people. Really, the 4th time we've seen this within the past year. What can we do about that? Because it seems like this is the new way that terrorists are going to try to kill innocent people, just by literally taking their car and running down the street, driving over people. How do you stop that from happening?
Well, I actually think it's more challenging for that to happen in the U.S. near the Capitol building than in Parliament. You know, there's no equivalent in Washington, or at least near the Capitol, to the long straightaway that you see on the Westminster Bridge leading right up to the Houses of Parliament, where an attacker can really build up a lot of speed and plow into a bunch of people and become very hard to stop. I mean, this isn't just a commentary on Washington traffic, but the police here do a very good job of making sure that you have to turn multiple times and that anybody in a car doesn't face a long straightaway where they can ram into a bunch of people and get very, very close to the Capitol unstopped.
Also, you have a lot of officers in London who don't carry guns with them, right? So in the situation like we saw yesterday, if someone comes after you with a knife, you would want to have a gun if you're a police officer to be able to protect yourself. And in many cases, they don't have one.
No, absolutely. And in fact, they're very proud that the majority of British cops don't carry guns. And it's a tradition that harks back to the 19th century when the first police force was instituted, and they wanted to differentiate it from the army, which of course walked around with rifles and was very unpopular. However, I think you really have to acknowledge that in the modern day, with the threat of modern Islamic terrorism, this just doesn't really make sense anymore. Your officers have to be armed.
Yeah, I think everybody is glad to see that those 2 officers that opened fire on that suspect were armed, and I think that made all the difference in the world. Andrew, thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thanks.